few years ago, the Texas State Board of Education made some proposals to change history books. And to make a long story short, they wanted to whitewash history, okay? They wanted to gloss over some civil rights leaders or not include them at all. And they wanted to focus on right-wing leaders as American heroes. Now, the main publishing giants when it comes to these history books, Pearson Education and McGraw-Hill Education, have utilized some of the proposals because, of course, the school board had voted on it. And unfortunately, the books that get published in Texas are utilized in school districts throughout the country, okay? And as a result, the Texas Freedom Network decided to find historical scholars to look at the new books to decipher whether or not they're realistic, whether or not they are actually doing history any justice. And here's what they found. First of all, just a little bit of semi-good news, okay? Kathy Miller said the following: in all fairness, it's clear that the publishers struggled with these flawed standards and still managed to do a good job in some areas. On the other hand, a number of textbook passages essentially reflect the ideological beliefs of politicians on the state board rather than sound scholarship and factual history.
Damn. The sound you just heard was an elbow dropping on Texas's head.
And that's like the semi-good news from their analysis, okay? Which means it just gets worse. Okay. So one thing that they definitely do is they try to get the students to question the separation of church and state, okay? So the way that they do this is as follows. The Texas High School Social Studies curriculum standards ask students to compare and contrast the wording of the Constitution's Establishment Clause, which prohibits state religion, with the phrase separation of church and state, which was established during later Supreme Court decisions. Now, what's the issue there? According to one of the scholars, it implies there is no such thing as the legal doctrine of separation of church and state. Okay.
Which is, of course, not true, right? First of all, it's clear that it says, we shall not establish a religion. That these guys always claim to be strict constructionists. Okay. It's right there. You have trouble reading, right? But technically, the words church and state weren't used. Different words were used to convey the same exact meaning, but that's okay because the Supreme Court later came and they did use those words. Oh, we left that out. Oops.
Exactly. All right. So that's problematic because one thing that you've noticed in a lot of conservative school districts is they want to do away with some science classes and they want to replace them with creationism, right? Which is absolutely disastrous. When you get rid of the theory of evolution and you get rid of fact and you replace it with religion, then all of a sudden you lose all rationality.
But you see, Anna, that's why it's a damn shame that Muslims are running the Texas school board. Because Muslims love to intermingle their religion with the government. They want the religion to take over the government. That's the problem with Islam, right? And they want their religion to run everything. They have this thing called Sharia law, and they want it to rule us instead of our secular constitution. It seems like that's what they want to do. They're Christians, right? Fascinating.
In terms of religion, notably, the curriculum standards also say that students should be able to identify Moses as someone who informed America's founding documents. Something critics say is an example of the State Board of Education trying to insert religion into the classroom.
I have to explain this story. A bunch of Israeli archaeologists, a couple of them, went to find archaeological records of Moses in Egypt. And now they were not biased against it, they were actually trying to find it, right? And so they knew that it wasn't going to be overwhelming because otherwise we would already know a lot about it. But they figured obviously if you go in, you're going to find some record because the Egyptians actually back in the day kept great records. Ahmed sold loaf of bread to Mehmed, etc., right? And they find all that. No record of Moses in any way, shape, or form. Not the name, not the things he did in the Bible, not any of it. If he had split the Red Sea, they might have written that down, right? The frogs falling down from the sky, they might have written that down. None of it. Moses didn't even exist, let alone affect Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson thousands of years later.
It's amazing. And look, the point that I want to make before we get to the slavery thing and everything is they're always complaining about public education being utilized as a tool of indoctrination. What is this? This is indoctrination. Okay, you are literally taking facts out of history books because you want to indoctrinate the youth so they follow your political agenda and your political ideology. It's sick. So if that didn't disgust you enough, let's now move on to slavery and segregation. According to the analysis, the curriculum standards seem to minimize some of the darker aspects of American history, such as slavery and segregation. While discussing Civil War history, the elementary school standards list sectionalism and states' rights before slavery as the primary causes for the conflict. So when they talk about the Civil War, for instance, they talk about property rights as opposed to the Civil War being about slavery.
Right. Here's a little problem with that. The property rights they were protecting was the rights to hold human beings as property. It might have helped to, might have helped to clarify that a little bit. So this whole idea that slavery was not the principal reason for the Civil War is total and utter BS. Now, if you're going to give a sophisticated, nuanced interpretation of what happened and the cause of the Civil War, of course you should do that. Was slavery the only reason? No. There were economic factors. There was many different factors, right? But was slavery a principal reason? That was the main thing they disagreed on. Of course it was a principal reason. Not other property rights, which they were slightly aggrieved by.
It's crazy. So they continue. Black codes, the KKK, or sharecropping, the term Jim Crow never appears. Incredibly, racial segregation is only mentioned in a passing reference to the 1948 integration of the armed forces.
And that's, of course, when we got rid of segregation, right? So they're like, oh, segregation, it never happened in the first place, but this is when we got rid of it.
Amazing, amazing.
Moses is in there, but segregation and Jim Crow is not in American history.
Let's whitewash history, okay? Yeah. Let's indoctrinate the youth. Okay, final thing, economics, right?
Okay.
Of course,
this is going to be good.
We want to talk about, different economic systems, what works, and what do you think they want to push for? Deregulation, unmitigated capitalism. Here it is. The standards connect capitalism with the conservative ideal of limited government, asking students to be able to explain why a free enterprise system of economics developed in the new nation, including minimal government intrusion, taxation, and property rights.
Yeah, okay. Teach history. Now, when you look at founding fathers, they had differences of opinion on whether there should be a central bank or not. For example, Alexander Hamilton favored one. Most of the founding fathers believed in a very, very limited government, but not necessarily in terms of regulation. And some wanted taxes, some didn't want taxes. Teach the actual history, both sides. But don't pretend that our founding fathers were all named Ronald Reagan. Okay, that's just not the case. And so, obviously, they're trying to put their politics into this.
Yeah.
But to be fair, it was a critical turning point in American history when at Bunker Hill we defeated the Canaanites. So I'm glad that they've got that in there.